This lesson is going to be both 3.2 and 3.3. This is just about solving inequalities. So let's dive right into it. So first note that we're going to make is that we're going to treat inequalities the same as equations, okay? And something I want to do right here to kind of put off in the margin, just so we can see what inequalities even are. These are these kinds of phrases. This is less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, right? Same things we've been dealing with in 3.1. Okay, so anytime we see these symbols, we're just going to treat them like equal signs for the most part, okay? The only thing that we're going to change is, or that we're going to keep in mind, is that we are going to flip the direction of an inequality when specifically multiplying or dividing by a negative number on both sides, okay? So all of this definition right here, or all this description right here is really important. First off, it needs to be multiplying and dividing, and it needs to be a negative number, and it needs to be on both sides, right? So if we only have a negative number being multiplied on one side, that doesn't really count. But if we're multiplying both sides by negative numbers, then we are flipping the sign, okay? And so what that's going to look like is we're going to change the less than changes to a greater than, right? And vice versa. So we're flipping the direction of the sign, okay? So let's look at the 4 different properties of inequalities. We have the addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division property of inequalities, okay? And so we're going to look at examples of each of them, and we're going to look and see what the definition has to say. So first off, let's go ahead and show the entire definition. So for addition, if I have two numbers being compared, so I have A, if A is greater than B, then A plus N is greater than B plus N, right? So we can just add this, if we add the same number to both sides, it still makes the statement true. And that's the same with subtraction too. We can subtract the same number from both sides, and the statement is still true. And then for multiplication, we kind of have an extra rule here. So if A is greater than B, then A times N is greater than B times N. And A times M is less than B times M. Okay, so now we get the sign flip here. So we flip the sign. And the reason why we're flipping the sign is because we're stating that M is a negative number. And if M is a negative number, that's why we are flipping the sign, okay? And then same with division. We kind of make the same note where M is negative, which is why we flip the sign here, okay? So we're noticing that we're dividing by a negative number, okay? Let's do some examples so that it's easier to understand what's going on here. So first off, I'm going to look at the B side, or sorry, not the B side, the A side. Let's go ahead and solve this one. So for A, we are going to do x minus 6 is greater than or equal to negative 10. So what I need to do to each side to get x by itself, remember we're treating it just like an equation, okay? So we're going to add 6 to both sides. This is the addition property of inequality, where you can add 6 to both sides, and it still gives you a true statement, where x is greater than or equal to negative 4. Now let's look at the negative, or the subtraction property. Here we subtract off 1.4, so a subtraction property of inequality, we're going to subtract these, and when we subtract 1.4, we get 9.4 is greater than x. Notice I have not flipped the sign at all. Sign still stays the same, okay? Let's move on to C. C, now we have a negative number. We're dealing with negative 6x is greater than 18, okay? We're going to divide by negative 6. So notice we have a negative number being divided by on both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. Here we have division. and we have a negative. So we're dividing both sides by a negative number. Since we're doing that, the sign gets flipped, okay? So our final answer, the sign gets flipped. All right, now let's look at D. D, we have the same kind of thing going on where we have negative 1/2. In order to get rid of this negative 1/2, we have to times or multiply by a negative 2. So we're going to multiply by a negative 2. Okay, and that's going to allow us to flip the sign at the end. So x is greater than or equal to 1. Okay? So here are the two examples of when you would want to flip the sign. Now I'm going to give you some examples where we have negative numbers involved, but we're going to see that this does not mean that we're going to automatically flip the sign. So looking at E, we need to multiply both sides by 3/2. So we're going to go ahead, multiply both sides by 3/2. The 3/2 and the 2/3 cross out, and we're just left with x. And then negative 4 times 3/2 makes negative 6. And notice right here, the sign never flipped. And that's because the number that I'm multiplying by on both sides is a positive number. It doesn't matter that there's a negative 4 here. It's about it being on, where is it? Both sides, okay? Both sides of the inequality, okay? Now let's look over on this side. We got the same story. Dividing by 2, dividing by 2. Sign does not flip. We get negative 2.5, okay? So that's how we do these. All right, so what I want you to do is go ahead and do these problems right here. Do page 114, number 12 through 17 all, 121, number 14 through 16 all, and page 122, 32 through 34 all. So there should be 12 problems in total, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and let you pause the video and then come back and we'll work on it together. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start working on these. So I'm going to work through these kind of quickly because you should have already worked on these yourself. So I'm going to add 1/3 to both sides on this one. I'm going to add 1/3 to both sides. Negative 2/3 plus 1/3 gives me negative 1/3. So negative 1/3 is less than G, okay? And the directions tell you to graph. All you need to do when you're graphing, I'm just going to graph one of them for now because we already had a section on graphing. So I'm just going to show you what it should look like. Negative 2/3, and then over here, that would be a 0. So you just want to make sure that you put at least one number on each side of the number that you're focusing on, this negative 1/3. And if I'm going to put one number on each side, I'm going to go down by thirds. So going down by thirds makes negative 2/3. Going up by a third gives us back to 0. And I'm going to do an open circle on the top because there's no line underneath here. And then the G is touching the big side, so that all the answers need to go to the right, okay? All the answers go to the right, okay? I'm just going to do one graph. The rest of them I'm not going to graph because we already had a section on graphing them. So now we're just going to work on solving them, okay? Negative 7/4 or minus 7/4 gives me m is less than 4/4. But we want to make sure that we always simplify our answer. So the answer here is m is less than 1, okay? All right, let's go on to the next one. Minus 9.8, minus 9.8, okay? 11 minus 9, well, I'm going to borrow here, borrow 0.4, so this is 1.4, I believe. Yeah, 1.4 less than or equal to, okay. Okay, 15, going to add 1.7, add 1.7, h is less than negative, I think this is 1 point, is this 1.5? Yeah. Notice I haven't flipped the sign yet because I haven't even multiplied or divided yet. Okay, minus pi, minus pi. Notice we're getting s by itself here. Pi is a number, so we can get rid of it. And our answer is negative pi is greater than s. Okay? Moving on to the next one. Add 4.5 to both ends. We get 9.5 is greater than or equal to u. Okay? Let's go ahead and move on to the multiplication and division. Now we have to look out for if we're multiplying or dividing by a negative number. For 14, we're multiplying by a positive number on both sides, which is the positive 5, which is going to give me, I think this is 13. Is it just 13? Yeah, it's 13. I'll put it in 0.0 here. Okay, notice the sign didn't change at all because I multiplied by, I multiplied by a positive number. And here I'm dividing by a positive number, okay? So that gives me 2 is less than k. All right, next one. Okay, here's where I'm getting close here. So divided by 4. Okay, here's what's interesting. Dividing by 4, it's hard to divide a fraction by a whole number. So instead of dividing, I'm actually going to change this problem to 3/2 times the reciprocal of 4, which is 1/4. Okay, that's a lot easier. So that gives me x is less than or equal to 3/8, or I should say negative 3/8. Notice that the sign hasn't changed at all, and that's because every number I've been multiplying or dividing by is a positive number, right? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Divide by -7. Divide by -7. Okay, here's where the flip happens. D, now I have to flip the sign because I just multiplied or divided by a -7, giving me -8, okay? And here, I'm going to go ahead and highlight the fact that I flipped the sign on this one. Okay, and then I'm just going to quickly give the answer to this one. The answer to this one is 12, or -12 is less than m, and the answer for this one is k is greater than or equal to -9. Okay, and that's it for that section.